Hello, my friends. Today we'll start with a very interesting statement from Merz about the fact that the war will continue for a long time. The war in Ukraine will last for a long time, Merz said in an interview with ZDF. According to him, wars end either with a military defeat of one side, which right now neither Moscow nor Kiev is close to, or through economic and or military exhaustion, which is also not currently happening. Existing diplomatic efforts are aimed at ending the war, but not at the cost of Ukraine's capitulation, the Chancellor said, noting that if Ukraine were to lose its independence, another country would be next. And the day after tomorrow, it will be our turn. That is not an option, Merz added. Overall, the outlook isn't very encouraging. He also said that Ukraine must maintain its independence, freedom, and much more. However, they don't plan to send their own troops to assist Ukraine.
Michael Kretschmer is right. Right now, no one is talking about sending ground troops to Ukraine, though I've heard from the French and the British. No, we are discussing. I'm present at all these negotiations, and I know what's being discussed. We are trying to formulate security guarantees in case of a ceasefire. Priority number one is supporting the Ukrainian army for the long-term defense of the country. This is the main priority, and we will start this immediately. Many things can only be done after a ceasefire. This requires an agreement with Russia, which will have conditions on both sides. On our side, the condition is that Ukraine keeps its independence, neutrality, and freedom. That's what we're working on. Right now, no one is talking about ground troops in Ukraine. No.
Friends, be sure to share your opinion about this in the comments. Now, let's move on to the situation along the front line, starting with the Kostiantynivka direction. Here, the Russians have managed to improve their positions in two areas near Shcherbinivka and Katarinivka, as well as near Novopivnichny. The Ukrainian forces have also managed to push the Russians back slightly, so the fighting here remains intense. At the same time, the Russians are already trying to attack Klebanbyk and are storming Pleshivka, and therefore the situation could likely worsen in the near future, as holding the defense here is extremely difficult since the Ukrainian forces are almost encircled. Fighters on the ground confirm that the Russians are already occupying some positions in the village of Klebanbyk. The Russians continue to take positions in the southern part of Klebanbyk, and our fighters are trying by all means to drive them out. Serious fighting continues. The Russians are also attempting to move northeast around Shcherbinivka to encircle our units and approach a stronghold near the dam while we are holding back their advance. North of Nelipivka, they are probing for weak spots to find safer paths, aiming to engage in battles for the settlement. In the Alexandro Shultine area, fighting is ongoing, though the intensity of attacks has slightly decreased. The Russians are committing significant forces here, and disregarding losses, we continue to respond. Now, let's move to the Dobropillia direction. Here, the Russians have again begun pushing toward the village of Zolotый Kolodez. Similarly, assaults have resumed on Shachove, Volodymyrivka, and Nikonorivka. Over the past day, there have been no significant changes. However, these attacks indicate that the Russians have again managed to gather reserves and are attempting to advance further. So far, cutting off this incursion hasn't been possible, and no official reports of Ukrainian counterattacks have been released. In the Pokrovsk area, the Russians carried out mechanized assaults yesterday near Novoekonomichne. The Ukrainian forces demonstrated how they repelled one of the Russian attacks. This effectively confirms that the Russians were pushed back from Novoekonomichne, and now the Russians are trying again to regain control. Additionally, assaults continue on Rodinske, Krasny Liman, and they are breaking through near Myrolubivka, storming the villages of Promень, Lysivka, Chunishine, the outskirts of Pokrovsk and Udachne, while advancing near Kotlene and Zvirove. So far, over the past day, there have been no changes, and all attacks are being successfully repelled despite very high activity. In the Novopavlivka direction, and the Russians continue to assault Filia and Alexandrograd. Ukrainian forces shared video footage showing the Ukrainian flag in the village of Dachne and wrote the following: our units were able to push the Russians out of the village of Dachne, Dnipropetrovsk region. The Russians tried to hold positions in trenches and groves, but were forced to retreat under pressure. The village is gradually coming under our control, and we are consolidating positions. The situation is stabilizing. At the same time, we understand that the Russians may attempt counterattacks, so operations continue. However, the general staff hadn't previously stated that this village was fully occupied by the Russians. Therefore, it's likely that the village has transitioned from the gray zone to full Ukrainian control. For now, we are waiting to see how the situation develops. In the Velyka Novosilka direction, the Russians continue to push toward the village of I don't see. Novoselivka. They're storming Komushovacha, but so far the Ukrainian forces are preventing them from securing new positions. The front line hasn't changed over the past day, and Ukrainian soldiers report that shelling is intensifying. Pokrovsk district, Dnipropetrovsk region. The Russians are systematically burning out the line with cups, targeting Velika Orostopil, Kolomyske, Тихе, Malomykhailivka, Dibrova, and Orly daily. They are striking populated areas precisely to destroy fortifications, depots, and troop locations. The scale of the strikes indicates preparations for advancement along this arc. In Pokrovsk, a mother drone is operating, deploying groups of FPV drones. Its operational radius has expanded, now reaching Chapline, threatening even deeper rare areas, creating a serious shortage of safe zones. Hopefully, these are one-off actions. Additionally, emphasis is placed on reinforcing fortifications around settlements to strengthen defense and logistics along the roads. Soldiers' lives come first. Prepare frames and provide everything necessary, or there will be many problems due to failures. In the Zaporizhia direction, the Russians continue pushing in the Kamyansk area and carrying out shelling, but so far there have been no changes along the front line, and it seems the Russians are unable to increase offensive activity there. In the Kherson direction, the Russians continue shell on the right bank, but no new assaults on the islands have been reported, and the front line has remained unchanged over the past day. Now moving to the Siversk direction. Here, the Russians are storming Dronivka and Serebryanka. However, activity has decreased so far, and there have been no new changes over the past day. In the Lyman direction, the Russians are storming Zarichne, pushing through the area of Kolodyazi and assaulting Shandrigolove, Karpivka, Novy Mir, Olgivka, and Druzhelubivka. Despite extremely high activity, the Ukrainian forces are still holding the line and no new changes have occurred. In the Borova direction, the Russians haven't launched any new assaults today. Shelling activity is also low and there have been no changes so far. In the Kupyansk direction, the Ukrainian forces have successfully pushed the Russians back from the villages of Myrne and Sobolivka, improving the situation there. However, the Russians continue to advance toward the outskirts of the city and are assaulting Petropavlivka. The situation remains difficult, and the Russians are preparing for increased activity. In the Dvorichna direction, the Russians are storming Novovasilivka and pushing through the fields toward Kolodezne. Over the past day, there have been no changes, but activity remains high. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians have been assaulting Gleboke for several days in a row. So far, they have had no success, and the Ukrainian forces continue to repel all attacks. Fighting also continues in Vovchansk, but the front line hasn't changed there. In the Sumy direction, the Russians have again increased the activity, trying to break through near Oleksiivka, Yunakivka, and across the border. Over the past day, they have launched more than 10 assaults, but with no success, and the front line remains unchanged. In the area of the village of Totkina, new attempts to cross the border are also being reported, but so far the Ukrainian forces continue to repel all attacks and there are no changes. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.